Hi everyone, I'm Gertie and welcome to a new month on Patreon. This month I'm bringing you something I'm super excited about. It's called the Artist Apron Dress. And of course I was inspired by our theme this year, the Charm Artist Collective, and thinking about women artists of the 50s and those fabulous smocks you sometimes see in photographs. But I wanted to create something that had an apron vibe to it, but there was also a wrap dress that could be worn as a pinafore, as a sundress, or as a layering piece. Also thinking back to how much you all loved the cobbler dress, I wanted to do another apron style, but really go like full feminine skirt for this one. I have an old simplicity pattern that I was super inspired by that shows aprons as a sort of layering piece over other garments to be worn at home, cooking, gardening, doing some light carpentry, that sort of thing. So what I have created is a very versatile pattern with lots of options, as always. I know you all love options. So let me just walk you through some of the fabulous garments we have on the dress forms here. So you can see on this one I have done the shoulder straps, which cross in the back and button inside. And as you can see, there's a wrap back here on the skirt as well, and it creates a really flattering shape on the back of the dress. Okay, so then on the end, you can see that we have gone full Carpenter fantasy. I've been doing a lot of work on my new house, stripping paint and other glamorous things, and it got me musing, what if we did a full Carpenter dress with a fabulous full skirt, but in a more rugged fabric like this waxed cotton, which has a very like workwear feel to it. So on this one, we've done the halter strap, which is just a loop around the neck, like a traditional Carpenter style apron. And then the bib pocket, which I love, with this pencil compartment here and rivets on each side, as well as rivets on the strap. And then of course, we've done the full skirt, full length skirt. And obviously we had to do the Carpenter pocket on the skirt here as well for all of your woodworking tools. Okay, so let's just talk through the pattern pieces just like we do every month. I have minimized them down to about a third of their full size so we can see them all on the table together. So not a ton of pieces in this pattern, but maybe a little more than we're normally working with. So we do have a front bodice piece that's cut on the fold. This is the armhole here, the top of the apron. And then you have a bust dart and a waist dart that has a cut out section. So make sure that you cut out that little triangle down there. There are marks for placing the bib pocket. We also have the bodice back, which looks really different from bodice backs that you're used to seeing because this is a wrap in the back that goes to a V. So you have your mark for your straps here. And speaking of straps, you have two options. You have a shoulder strap. You would cut two of these. They cross in the back and then button into the bodice back. Or you can do a halter strap that's more like a traditional apron look. You would just cut one and then it loops around from bodice edge to bodice edge. You also have your waist ties. Because this is a wrap dress, you're going to have two waist ties, one on each side, and they get centered between these two circles on the bodice front. Now, in terms of options, we have a bib pocket that can be sewn onto the bodice front for that Carpenter style look, and we even included a sewing line here for your tools, your pencil, whatever you may put in your Carpenter pocket. Let's talk about skirts next, skirt pieces. So you have your skirt front, which is cut on the fold. As you can see, this is a 3/4 circle skirt, so it's very full. Cut on the fold, and you're just going to cut one of these. And then your skirt back, which is a huge piece because it has to overlap in the back for the wrap. So you need to cut two of these. Now we have some cutting lines on the skirt pieces. This is the cutting line if you want to make the short apron version, which would be worn over pants or a pencil skirt, or you could even wear it like as a little cute beach romper kind of look, would be adorable. You also have on your skirt front, there are marked lines for your Carpenter Pocket, which is this cool applied pocket that has it has 4 different divided pockets for your hammers, you know, your leveling devices, whatever carpenters carry in their pockets. So you would put this on the skirt front, and as you can see, it has some ease built into it. We love pockets here at Charm, and we like pockets that fit a lot of things in them, right? So you have to have a lot of ease at the top to fit your phone or your snacks, whatever you may be putting in there. So that's why the piece looks bigger than the skirt, but you'll see how we sew it later on in the process. And then finally, if you don't want to do that Carpenter pocket look, because if you want to do more like a pinafore look or a sundress, then you probably don't want that Carpenter pocket. So you would do your side seam pockets. You need to cut 4 of those. And we've done a lot of side seam pockets for Charm, so we're not going to show you how to sew that today. Today we're going to do the Carpenter version with the bib pocket and the Carpenter pocket on the skirt. Okay, so let's talk about supplies and fabrics. So first of all, fabrics. There are a lot of different choices you could make for this garment depending on the vibe you're going for. So for the one I'm wearing, I chose this really pretty cotton linen blend. This is more of your like French pastoral cottagecore fantasy. You could also do, this is a cotton linen blend. This is called Essex fabric, which is available from a lot of different retailers and comes in a lot of really pretty yarn dyed colors. This is sort of a charcoal color. And that would be really pretty for like a smock dress kind of vibe. For my short apron that you see in the photo shoot, I used a cotton canvas, which has a lot of body to it. So if you see that skirt, you know, it really stands out. So the more body your fabric has, the more volume your skirt will appear to have. And then for a special version, for something a little bit different, we decided to play around with some waxed cotton in the studio because I love the look of, you know, really rustic Carpenter aprons and bags that are made out of waxed canvas. So I found a slightly lighter weight waxed cotton. And this needs special sewing skills. So if you would like to try the waxed cotton version, do read our tips in the instructions this month because waxed cotton has a lot of special properties that make it a little different to sew than any of these other fabrics. So just keep that in mind. For the Carpenter pocket, you're going to need a lining, and for the bodice, you need a lining. So if you want to use a different fabric for your lining rather than a self fabric, you could just use a lightweight cotton. And the pocket's a really fun place to play around with a hidden print inside of your pocket too. So you could do like a little novelty print or something inside your pocket. So those are the types of fabrics that we used. Also denim, corduroy, there are a lot of different fabrics that would work. Do check out our fabric recommendations in the instructions. Other supplies you'll need, you know we use this a lot. This is the 1¼ inch wide fusible stay tape in the fine knit version, and we'll give you a link for this. If you don't want to buy the stay tape, this is really just strips of fusible interfacing in a lightweight variety like tricot or a lightweight woven, and you can cut your own strips. We use this to stabilize the upper edge of the bodice as well as the back, those long edges of the wrap skirt in the back because they're on the bias, so you need to stabilize some portions. Oh, and the upper edge of the back bodice too, which is also on the bodice. So just to keep things from stretching out as you wear them and sew them, it's a good idea to stabilize. Thread, as usual, we use all-purpose poly thread. For the shoulder strap version, for the one that crosses in the back and buttons in, you'll need 2 buttons, 3/4 inch wide. And anytime I have a button that's not going to be seen, I like to use these flat, clear buttons because they don't add a lot of bulk. Now, if you would like to do the Carpenter version, like the one that we did in the waxed cotton, and we're going to be doing it today too in an Essex blend in pink, you might want to add rivets for a more rustic workwear type feel. So we have 8mm brass rivets. And you know I love this cam snap machine in pink, so we're going to be showing you how to apply rivets today. And keep in mind that you're also going to need, if you have the cam snap or something like this, you're going to need the correct die to go with your 8mm rivets. Now, if you don't want to invest in a big table press like this, There are like small Dritz handheld rivet presses too, and there are a ton of tutorials out there for those. So that's another possibility if you don't want to invest in one of these table presses yet. Okay, so that's all your supplies. We're ready to get started sewing. Okay, so we are ready to start sewing. So we're going to start with the front bodice, which I have laid out on the ironing board here. And a lot of this is like sewing any other dress bodice. It has darts for shaping. Now, I did want to show you that we went ahead and interfaced the upper edge, and that's just to prevent this from gaping over time. So we just did a strip of interfacing on the wrong side of the bodice front at the neckline. And the next thing we're going to do is sew all of the darts. So I've already done half of them. I wanted to show you these two darts, the bust dart and the waist dart. So we're going to put this dart, the bust dart is just a very traditional dart, and you've probably seen me sew a few of these before. I'm going to pin it up the leg of the dart, making sure that the lines are matching. And I'm going to sew up the leg of the dart, and you can backstitch at the beginning. Oops, I'm on a zigzag. I don't remember what I was sewing last, but it must have been one of the baton tops or something. Okay, so I'm going to sew it with a straight stitch, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning. My light just came on too. Whew, okay, there we go. All right, so I'm sewing with a straight stitch, about 2.5 millimeters long. And then at the end of the dart, I am just gradually sewing off of the fabric rather than backstitching. I'm going to hand tie this knot. And then trim it. And then I wanted to show you the waist darts as well, because they do have a little cutout here. So you're going to really, I mean, it's really the same as the bust dart, but I just wanted you to see how it looked with that cut out little triangle on the dart, which gives you a little seam allowance. But the sewing method is exactly the same. We sometimes do that little cutout when the darts get bigger, especially in the upper cup sizes, so that you don't have too much bulk in the dart when you go to press it. Okay, so we're going to stitch along that line. And yeah, you can see I have a little 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on the dart itself. Okay, and we're going to tie off these ends, and then we're going to talk about pressing the darts. All right, we're going to press the bust dart down towards the waist. You can give it a little steam. This fabric I'm using is that Essex linen cotton blend from Robert Kaufman, which I was talking about in the previous scene, and it presses really nicely, and you can give it some steam. Okay, and then on the waist dart, you're going to want to slash up to the tip of the dart. So there's the cutout here, and then you're going to want to continue slashing till about 1/2 inch away from the dart point. Then put it over your ham. Oops. And you can press these seam allowances of the dart open. And then when you get to the tip, you want to just press it slightly towards the center front of the bodice. Okay. So I'm going to spend a little more time later off camera pressing these darts because I need to do the other side too. But for now, let's move on because the next step is to sew the side seams. So you're going to take your bodice front, right side up, And then grab your two bodice backs. And again, I have already interfaced the upper edge of the bodice backs here. So you can go ahead, if you haven't already done this, apply a strip of interfacing to this upper edge to stabilize it. So we're going to take these two bodice backs and put them right sides together with the bodice front. And very important, because this is a wrap bodice, you need to have an opening to thread your waist ties through. So on the left side of the bodice, as you'll be wearing it, not the left side when you look at it, right? So imagine that you're wearing the bodice. The left side needs to be left open between these two circle marks. So you can even give yourself a little, you've probably seen me do this before if you've watched a few of my videos. If I know that I need to stop stitching, if it's a sort of like SOS turn back situation, then I will give myself a little X with my pins. And there's a notch here to match to your dart. And the dart should be pressed down. Okay, and now I'm going to stitch along. Now I'm really only stitching 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge up. Back stitch up to that first circle mark. Okay, so then I broke my stitching and I'm going to start again at the next circle mark. And then I can stitch all the way to the top. Okay, and now I can press these seam allowances open. So as you can see, I've created a little opening for my ties to go through here. Now on the other side seam, I can just sew from top to bottom. So I'm going to put these right sides together. I don't have to worry about those circle marks. I'm just going to stitch all the way down. Get rid of that little thread there. Oops. Okay, I'm going to press these seam allowances open as well. Okay, now let's talk about the bodice lining. Now you may have noticed I didn't finish any of these seam allowances because it's going to be fully lined, so you don't have to worry about that. So I've already constructed my bodice lining in the same way that I did the outer bodice, though you have to be really careful because you do have to leave an opening in the bodice side seam as well, but it has to be the opposite side. So it should be the right side as you would wear it. So if you want to just look at the two together, it has to be the opposite side because these are going to go wrong sides together when you wear them and then they will align. So it always confuses me a little bit when I'm sewing it, but just know that it's not the same side. I mean, you'll discover it if you did it wrong and then you can always just open it up between the holes, which I've had to do on one of the samples. So don't worry if you have to do that. So I just wanted to call that out. The next thing we're going to do, you can put your lining aside. We're going to attach the waist ties. Now, I've already sewn my waist ties. You're going to need to sew yours. They are super easy to sew, which is why I wasn't going to show them today, but they're just a long rectangle that you're going to fold in half lengthwise and sew around the long open edge and the short end, and then turn it right, trim your seam allowances, turn right side out so that you have two long waist ties with one end finished and the opposite end is open, right? So now we are going to pin our waist ties to the bodice backs between the circle marks at the back edge, that short back edge. Like that. And so the tie should be facing in, okay? Because it's going to get sandwiched in between the lining when we sew the lining way down the road, a few steps from now. Okay, so again, I'm just going to, there are two circle marks, and we're going to place the waist tie right between there, pin, and now we are going to baste these in place on the machine. So you can go up to a 4 to 5 millimeter stitch length, use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and just baste these in place. This is just a temporary stitch for later on. Okay, so I have my waist ties basted on. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to sew the bib pocket. So here is what the piece looks like. Again, I have already interfaced the upper edge with the strip of interfacing here. And it's a good idea to finish these seams now. So we use serger here in the studio. You can zigzag or pink your seam allowances, whichever you want to do, but you're going to have to do it now if you want to finish your seams. First thing we're going to do is turn the upper edge down 5/8 of an inch. So I have a ruler handy here. Just double check this as you press. And now we're going to top stitch this at 1/2 an inch. Make sure you're on like a 2.5 to 3. I usually use 3 millimeters for top stitching. Just a little bit of a longer stitch looks nicer on top stitching. Ooh. Okay, got a little nest of thread back there, but anyway, we'll just keep going. We're going to turn in the rest of the seam allowances 5/8 of an inch as well. And one thing you're going to want to do is be very careful at the top here. You're going to want to maybe fold down this seam allowance or even trim it off so that you're not seeing this from the right side of the pocket. And these corners are, you can even do these first, maybe that would have been smart. Do these little corners here. Because it's not just a rectangular pocket, it has those little edges at the bottom, little diagonal edges that make it look like a real Carpenter apron. Now we can do the bottom. Okay, and maybe last we'll do these edges. And yeah, you can just kind of smush them down a little bit. This is a theme lately. Last month we were doing our baton top pockets and had to make sure those seam allowances weren't showing at the top. Okay, so now when you look from the front, you can see there's the shape we're trying to get here. Let me just double check that. I'm going to spend a little more time on this side before we move on. Okay. Okay, so I finished obsessively pressing my pocket. We're just gonna move on. I have gotten this to a place where it looks relatively even at the bottom, but if I were not on camera, I'd probably spend a little more time trying to get those corners even. But we're gonna move on for everyone's sake right now. Okay, so you're gonna grab your bodice. Okay, so now I am placing my pocket onto my bodice front, and you're gonna match it to the dots, the circle marks on the bodice, which I have already done. And now we're going to pin it in place around the outer edges of the pocket, so these two vertical edges and then the lower sides as well. So it's not a rectangle. I'm not sure exactly what shape this is, but you've got those two diagonal lines there. And now we are going to top stitch this in place around those outer edges. So you could use an edge stitch foot here, would be a great place to pull out the old edge stitch foot. I'm just going to eyeball it. But you're going to want to reinforce at the top here by stitching back and forth a couple times. And we're stitching right next to that fold. And then we have to pivot twice at each lower corner for our fancy shape. Okay, so let's see. Just trimming away those threads, and now we're going to sew that cute little pencil compartment on the pocket. You can also just give it a press. Always nice to press after top stitching something. So next thing we're going to do is mark in our stitching line for the pencil compartment. So you're going to want to go from the dot on the upper edge of your pocket, and I'm going to be using, so we talk about using a Hera marker in the instructions, which is pretty much something like this. It's a plastic tool with a rounded edge on it that you can use to crease your fabric to mark it in a non-permanent way that you can easily just rub out. So it's even less invasive, shall we say, than like a disappearing ink marker or something like that, because you're not even putting any substances on your fabric, you're just creasing the fabric itself. So from that little mark, I'm going to put my ruler so that it is level, one of the grids is level with the top edge of the pocket. Let me make sure I'm at the right spot here. Right there. So my line is starting at that circle mark right there at the top edge of the pocket, and it's my line is going to be perpendicular because I've aligned the grid here, and I'm just going to make a mark like this. So this isn't actually a Hera marker, by the way. This is a point presser, so you don't even have to buy a Hera marker if you don't want to. A point presser can do the same thing. So I'm going to stitch along this line right here. And same thing again, you want to backstitch a few times just to reinforce at the top of the pocket. And there we go. We've got a handy little pencil pocket. Okay, let me just trim those. So there you can see your finished Carpenter bib pocket. And now we will move on to the next step. All right, so the next step is to do the Carpenter pocket for the skirt. Obviously, this is optional. You could do the side seam pockets instead if you like, but today we're going to be showing how to do the Carpenter pocket because it's so different from anything that we've done before. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your Carpenter pocket in your dress fabric, and you're going to want to make sure that you have these dots marked on the right side of the fabric. So if you mark them on the wrong side, go ahead and transfer those dots on the top and bottom to the right side of the fabric. And just use like a faint pencil mark or something like that. This will get turned in so you see it at the top, and you can always erase it too, but just keep in mind that it might be visible. So be very careful. Make sure that that's a faint mark. And now we're going to take the lining for your Carpenter pocket and put it right sides together with the pocket itself. And you're going to pin along the upper edge and the lower edge. And we're going to sew these edges as well, and then just leave these short vertical edges unsewn. Okay, so same thing, pinning along the bottom. And now we're going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch along the lower edge and the upper edge. All right, finished stitching those seams, and now I'm going to grade my seam allowances. So I'm not going to make you watch me do the whole thing, but you are going to trim your seam allowance on the lining so it's the shortest one, and then the pocket itself should be slightly taller like that. Okay, so I'm going to keep going around those seams I just sewed and grade both those seam allowances before we can turn the pocket right side out. Okay, so now that I have graded my seam allowances, I'm going to do just a few little notches along the upper curved edge. I'm sorry, not notches, clips along the upper curved edge. Just because this is an inner curve. Okay, so now we can turn the pocket right side out. So just through the side, you're just gonna flip it. And now we're gonna press it flat. Now you're gonna have to spend a little time with it, and at the edges, just kind of roll the seam line out as much as possible and press it flat. So I'm going to continue like this, pressing the upper edge and then the lower edge. So this is going to take me a little while. I just pressed the whole thing flat from the right side too, just to make sure that the lining is all rolled to the inside where we want it to be. And the next thing we're going to do is top stitch along the upper edge at 1 inch. We wanted to get like a nice prominent top stitched edge on this Carpenter pocket because it has more of a workwear feel to have that wider top stitching. So pin along the upper edge just to keep the layers from shifting as you top stitch. And this is going to be at a full inch. Now we're ready to apply the pocket to the skirt front. So grab your skirt front and you'll want to have your pocket placement line marked on the right side. And we're going to cover it with the pocket, so don't worry about it showing. So we're going to match at the side seams. You're going to match your pocket here. And then at the lower edge of the pocket, you're going to want this folded edge, this finished edge of the lower edge of the pocket to just cover your marked line, like just barely cover it. And then you can start pinning along that lower edge. Once you've pinned along the entire lower edge, then you're going to want to place a horizontal pin at each of these dots here. Now, as I talked about in the pattern chapter, you're going to have a lot of excess at the top here to create the room in the pockets for all of your woodworking tools, okay? So match your dots there, match this lower edge. I'm going to keep going around and pinning. This is going to take a couple minutes, okay? And then we're going to come back and edge stitch the lower edge of the pocket. All right, so you can see I have pinned along the entire lower edge, and then we have a pin, you know, just horizontally at each of these circles at the top. And we're gonna baste all the layers together at the side edge again. But for now, we are just going to edge stitch along the lower edge of the pocket. So again, good place for an edge stitch foot if you have one handy. So just about 1/16 of an inch from this lower edge, from the fold. Stitch like this all the way around the lower edge of the pocket. Okay, so I finished stitching the pocket to the skirt, and now I'm just going to baste along these vertical edges. We already basted the pocket to itself, but now we're going to baste the pocket to the skirt. So back at a 4mm long stitch length and 1/2 inch seam allowance, just basting all of these layers together. And same thing on the other side. Okay, so final thing to do on this Carpenter pocket is to create those vertical lines of stitching that create the divided pockets, right? Because now it's all one piece, and now we want to create those individual pockets. So see, we have like our dot marks here and one at the bottom. So again, we're just going to use our point presser and a ruler to make a crease like that at each line so that we can stitch along the crease. Or you could use a disappearing ink marker if you prefer. But I feel like it's kind of nice to have methods like this that don't require actually marking the fabric, just creating those creases. Okay, so 3 lines of stitching total, which will create 4 separate pockets. I hope you guys love these pockets. I know our big oversized pockets are always really popular, so I'm excited to hear what you guys think about these ones. Okay, so let us stitch along those crease lines. And just like on the bib pocket, you can kind of do a reinforced line of stitching by just going back and forth a couple times at the top. So here is my Carpenter pocket. I need to trim a lot of these threads, but I guess I could do that later. Okay, so, but these are gonna drive me crazy, so I have to do it. Okay, there we go. All right, so there's the Carpenter pocket. Now we can put the skirt backs together with the skirt front to construct the side seams, essentially. So I should point out that on the skirt backs, which are quite large and in charge, I have already interfaced the diagonal back hem, right? So this is a vertical hem, which is eventually going to be turned in and top stitched. But because this is slightly on the bias, it's a 3/4 circle skirt. So the sides or the back seam goes out like that. You want to stabilize it so that you don't get ripples and stretching and all of that. So I already stabilized those back opening edges. Now I'm going to put each of these right sides together with the skirt front. I have some notches to match. And this is a 3/4 circle skirt. You can stitch, it's good practice to stitch anything that's on the bias like this from the bottom up to stabilize it. So I don't know if it'll make that much of a difference on this skirt, but I'm going to do that just because I try to keep that habit. So I'm going to stitch each side seam like that and then press open, and then you'll have a fully constructed skirt. Now we're going to attach the shoulder straps to the bodice. Okay, so I'm doing the shoulder strap version, the one that crosses in the back. You might be doing the halter strap version. So let me just show you how the shoulder strap version would be, and then we can talk briefly about the halter strap. Okay, so you've got your 2 straps sewn. This is the same as the waist tie that we talked about. You're going to fold so that lengthwise edge and 1 short edge, and then leave this angled end open. Okay, so now you have 2 straps and they are angled downwards like this at the top. and you're going to baste them to the right side of the bodice front. Now, we recommend in the instructions that you mark in your seam allowance on the wrong side. You can see I've done it in red tracing wheel here. So the reason for that is you want to make sure that this strap ends exactly at this corner, okay? You don't want it to overlap or for there to be a little gap or anything. So you can even just put a pin through the corner that you've marked and make sure that your strap is right next to it. You're going to pin it in place, matching the raw edge. And now the strap should be angled inwards towards the center front of the bodice. And same thing on this side, I can see my marking here. So I'm making sure the finished edge of the strap is matching my seam allowance marked in there. Okay, I feel good about that. And now we're going to baste the straps in place. There we go. And next we are going to sew the skirt to the bodice. Okay, so now that we've got the straps attached to the bodice, now we can attach the skirt to the bodice. So let's grab our skirt and we're going to put it right sides together with the bodice. Now you may notice that the construction order on this project is a little different than a traditional dress. For instance, you may be wondering when we're going to line the bodice or when we're going to finish the back edge of the skirt. And the construction order is just a little different on this project, so just keep that in mind. We're going to get to lining the bodice after this step. So you're going to pin your bodice to your skirt and make sure you're matching your notches. And these two edges are going to be flush with each other. And after we line the bodice, then everything kind of comes together very quickly. All right, so I'm going to pin all along this waistline seam. Make sure you match those side seams. And then I'm going to stitch this at 5/8 of an inch. And the waist ties stay kind of like sandwiched between the two layers here. But we're just going to start stitching here. Don't worry about this back edge now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stitch these at 5/8 of an inch. Tucking in that tie. And starting at the back. Raw edge. Oops. And because the skirt is really curved and this back bodice is rather straight, you might need to just hold these two layers taut to make sure that they match up together. So I have attached my bodice to my skirt. And at the waistline seam, I trimmed it down to about 3/8 of an inch. And then, like I said, there's a lot, this is a really curved waistline, so I just do a little snip throughout. Otherwise, you're gonna see some constricting around the waist. So you can just clip into those seam allowances about every inch or inch and a half just to release that curve. And then I press the seam allowance up. Now we are going to line our bodice. So you might be wondering, maybe you've been wondering, when are we going to line the bodice? It's happening now. So we're going to take our bodice lining, and first thing you're going to do is press up the waistline on the bodice lining. So just along that waistline seam, you're going to turn it up 5/8 of an inch and press it in place. Here. Now we're going to put the dress bodice out right side up. Take your bodice lining, and we're going to put them right sides together. So you want to match these corners on the bodice, and the straps are going to get sandwiched in between. So I'm just starting at the center front, and then I'm going to work my way out on each side with the pinning. So I'm probably going to stitch from the outer side, the pink side, because that's where I marked in that seam allowance. And on that corner, it's really important that you stitch right on the seam allowance so that you get a nice crisp finish with the strap at that edge. Okay, so now we are going to take the waist ties and make sure they stay sandwiched in between two. And this turned up edge of the lining needs to meet exactly at the waistline seam. And we are going to be stitching along the short edge here where the strap is sandwiched, and then up and around upper edge. Now I need to keep pinning my other side, so I need to finish this and then we're going to go stitch. Okay, so now that I've fully pinned in place my lining, like I said, I'm going to stitch from the pink side so that I can follow this marked line around the neckline. But it doesn't matter that much as long as you're able to pivot exactly where you need to pivot at that outer corner of the bodice. All right, so I'm starting at the waistline seam. And I'm going to stitch all the way around. I'm going to pivot here. Okay, now this is the part where I keep telling you, you have to be careful. You can see I have a line marked in there. I'm going to pivot exactly at that point. Here's where my strap is between the layer, my shoulder strap, and now I can keep going. ending at the opposite waistline seam. Okay, so one thing I would suggest that you just double check is that you're happy when you turn this right side out. This is the thing I kept harping on, is that you want to be happy with this corner right here because you want this strap to exactly meet the corner. You don't want a little gap there, okay? So if you're happy with how it looks, then you can flip it back. If you're not happy, you can just take out that section and readjust. Now I'm going to grade these seam allowances. So the lining is going to be the shorter one, and then any straps could be slightly taller than that one, and then the dress itself is the tallest one when you're grading. Okay, so I am going to continue all the way around grading these seam allowances, and then next we will be understitching. Okay, so now that I have graded my seam allowances, I am just going to trim these corners away as well, like that. On the other side, those back corners, just to remove any bulk. And now we can turn these right side out so you can see how nice and finished that's going to look there. And the next thing we're going to do is understitch the lining. Just make sure my iron's on. Okay, so there are going to be a few places where you can't get into corners and stuff like that. Like right here, you're not going to be able to understitch that corner. So just start as close as you can to the corner. And I'm going to make sure my seam allowances are underneath the lining here. And I'm understitching just about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line. And just holding these two, the bodice and the lining, taut as I'm stitching. And I'm just going to keep going all the way around the neckline, and I'm going to have to stop around the corners where the straps are and start stitching again just because of that tight corner. Okay, so here I'll just break my stitching. And pick it up again just next to the strap here. And the strap should be facing down, and I'm understitching on the lining here. And now I can press the edge of my lining where I understitched it. So I'm just going to roll the lining to the inside and press it here, getting a nice crisp edge. And now what you'll notice here is your back skirt is starting to turn in, which is what we want. And after you're done pressing the bodice lining in, you can go back and press your seam allowance at the back skirt edge in 5/8 of an inch. And then the final step will be top stitching that at 1/2 inch. But for now, let me just keep pressing around the neckline. Okay, so now you can see how nice and crisp that's going to look around the neckline edge. And like I said, my next step will be to turn in these back skirt seam allowances 5/8 of an inch all the way down and press them. Top stitch at 1/2 inch. And then the final thing I want to talk about in this little section is what to do with the lining on the inside of the dress. Let me get this out of the way. So this is like we're going to hand stitch it, right? So just like any dress bodice where you have a free lining on the inside, what you're going to want to do is pin it in place, matching all of your seams, etc. You're going to be hiding the seam allowances between the layers. I'm going to pin it in place, and then I'm going to hand stitch it in place off camera, obviously. Now, one thing that you need to look at is your opening for your tie. So I would trim away the seam allowances a little bit more on the lining here so that you don't have those seam allowances blocking your opening. And then after you do your hand stitching this lining seam allowance down to the waistline seam allowance, you are going to top stitch around the opening, stitching through both the lining and the dress layers, top stitching at like 1/8 of an inch just to secure those together and reinforce them, and then this will be where your tie passes through. Okay, so we have a lot of hand finishing work to do here, so I'm going to go ahead with that. I'm going to let you do that on your own, and then we'll come back and talk about the other things that need to happen to finish off this project. Okay, so we have a lot of finishing stuff to talk through now. Once you've done that hand stitching on your lining, your dress is pretty much done, but there's some finishing to do. First of which is doing your buttonholes on your shoulder straps. And by the way, I just realized right now that I forgot to tell you guys, if you're doing the halter strap, it's the same idea. It just loops around like this, right? So that this goes at the back of your neck, okay? But same idea for sewing them. Okay, but for your buttonhole placement, you're going to want to try on the dress. Pin it. So at your back bodice, you'll have a button mark, right? So you'll want to pin the strap at the length that works for you. We give you a little extra length on the strap. So if you pin it here, unless you're very tall or normally need your straps lengthened, then you'll probably find that the included strap is too long for you. So it's fine to have a little extra hanging off at the end, but you'll just want to pin it in place, make sure that it fits the way you want it to, and then sew your buttonhole vertically at the position where you marked, okay, with the bottom of it ending at your mark. Next, you are going to hand sew your button on the inside of your bodice back at the button mark, right? So one of those clear buttons that I showed you at the beginning, you're going to hand sew it right there, just to the lining. Okay, and then you will have your hem. So because this is a 3/4 circle skirt, it's going to need to be hung for at least 24 hours. So put it on a dress form, put it on a hanger, let it hang, let those bias portions of the skirt settle, and then you can level it up from the ground. I use my dress form, so you put it on a dress form and then measure up with a yardstick, leveling it up, evening it up from the bottom to make sure it's all even. And then you can finish, trim it off, any excess off, and then finish that lower edge with your serger or however you want. Turn it up 1/2 inch. No, I'm sorry, turn it up 5/8 of an inch and then top stitch at 1/2 inch, okay? So then your hem is done. And then the only thing left to do is if you want to do this rivet detail for this Carpenter look, you're going to do your rivets, okay? So I did want to walk you through riveting. Okay, so I have placed little circles where I would like my rivets to go. So we just included in the instructions where we put rivets. You could get creative with your rivet placement, but what we decided to do was one on each side of the strap. That's something that you'll see in like handbags a lot is, you put a rivet on each side to really secure it. And then we also put rivets on either side of the bib pocket. But I mean, you could, if you like love rivets. You could go crazy. You could put one right there on the other side of the pencil compartment. You could put some at the bottom. So, you know, or you could even put some on the Carpenter pocket, on the skirt, on those dividers. So anywhere that you would do like reinforcement stitching, you could put a rivet. So I'm just going to do these 6 though, right? Yeah, 6. Okay, so I've placed, just make a little mark where you want your rivets to go. And the first thing we're gonna do is punch holes at those marks. So in my cam snap table press, I have put a 2mm hole punch. So riveting can be a little nerve-wracking. Eyelets, anything where you're like making a hole in your project is a little scary, but that's the idea. You're just making those holes. So I'm gonna go ahead and do them all right now. Bless you, Hattie just sneezed. Okay, we're gonna do a little hole right here. Not there, that's a piece of lint. Okay, so I've made all of my hole punches. And now I'm going to change the die to my riveting die. So the dies are just these attachments, and you'll have a different one for every type of item that you set on this table press. So eyelets, jeans buttons, etc. But for rivets, you have 2 separate pieces. And you're going to place the one with the long end into one of the holes you set. And then the short end just snaps onto the back. Like that. And you snap them on with your hands first before you put it into the table press. And then you just use some elbow grease. And there you go, that's one rivet, nice and secure. So I'm gonna go through and set all of those rivets. And I think it looks so cute with the pink. It's a really nice contrast between the more, you know, workwear looking rivets and then this dainty pink linen. Okay, so that is your, well, I have a little more finishing left to do, but that is your almost finished apron dress. Okay, everyone, I hope you have loved sewing along with me today on the artist apron dress. We have learned so much, including how to fully line a wrap bodice. We've done that fun bib pocket, as well as the fabulous fully lined Carpenter pocket on the skirt. And we talked about adding rivets to your project. So I hope you have learned a lot today and that you're inspired to create every variation of the artist apron dress. Thank you all so much for watching and for being patrons, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.